Hey guys, what's up? It's the Tominator. And as a follow up to that last video, I just wanted to keep going with this whole genetics conversation since I've still got a few more names in mind. So, in this one, we're going to be discussing 5 more examples of unmistakably great genetics. The first of these is Chris Cormier, arguably the most underrated bodybuilder of the 1990s, and by extension of all time, since the 90s had probably the deepest talent pool of any era. Chris also competed into the early 2000s as well, and ended up with 6 second place finishes at the Arnold Classic, which still stands as the record today. But anyway, here was a guy with essentially 0 weaknesses. Standing at 5'10", Cormier had phenomenal structure and symmetry, an excellent back and legs, a broad and powerful chest, and to top it all off, he maintained a trim set of abs. The guy even had a decent pair of calves and forearms, so nothing was really lagging or out of proportion. In Cormier's case, what really proves his genetic superiority, though, is the fact that he was a major party animal. There were times when he allegedly would go out clubbing all night before a show to sweat out some excess water, and he'd be doing a lot more than just dancing, if you know what I mean. There's actually a pretty revealing little clip from his video titled, "I Am the Real Deal," which I'll link to in the description below, where Cormier admits to almost dying from overdosing on cocaine one time. I also read an article where he referenced taking lots of stimulants and partaking in extracurricular activities in the restrooms and dark corners of the nightclub. So suffice it to say, Cormier wasn't your typical sleep, eat, train, workaholic type of bodybuilder. His wild partying nature was well known even at the time. Just listen to what the commentators had to say back at the 2002 Mr. Olympia.
Chris has always been a guy in the past that, as phenomenal as he looks, has always had a hard time focusing to put it all together, hasn't he?
You know, I've known Chris for about 12 years now. He's such a laid-back character. Sometimes he gets out of sync with the bodybuilding lifestyle. But I tell you what,
he's out all night?
He doesn't just come to Vegas for the show. Let's put it that way, all right?
But to his credit, Cormier did train pretty hard and heavy in the gym. He might have been a little reckless in terms of his lifestyle and whatnot, but that doesn't mean he was lazy. I believe he was even one of the first to chest press the 200-pound dumbbells, along with Ronnie Coleman. So that sort of heavy lifting goes a long way to contributing to his muscular density. You don't get that from just coasting off pure genetics alone. Alright, next up is Vince Taylor, another largely overlooked legend of a bygone age. What a lot of people forget, or simply don't know, is that Taylor actually held the record for the most IFBB wins with 22, before Kevin Levrone and later Ronnie Coleman, and finally Dexter Jackson would surpass him. Taylor had a great physique though. He was only about 5'9", but his proportions made him look taller, and he had easily some of the greatest biceps in history. I personally ranked him at number 10 of all time for this body part. Vince also had a terrific shoulder-to-waist ratio, so he really excelled in that front relaxed shot. Now, as far as the lower body's concerned, the calves were surprisingly low and strong, but his quads were probably the biggest weak point. They could have used another couple inches to balance out that massive upper body, but the caveat here is that Taylor didn't even squat. That's right, he only ever leg pressed because he had knee problems, which explains why his quad development tapers off so much towards the bottom. So in light of that information, I think it's amazing that his legs looked as good as they did. And again, it just speaks to premium genetics. More evidence comes in the form of his longevity. It turns out that Dexter still has some work to do, as Taylor already competed at the Olympia in the open class over the age of 50 back in 2006 and 2007, where he placed 11th and 10th respectively. He still looked really good at the time, too. It was mostly just the legs that were noticeably fading. You've got to have amazing genetics to maintain this sort of shapely muscle mass at that age. There's no two ways about it, so Vince Taylor definitely deserves some respect. Samir Bannu is another guy who fits the bill. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that, for his time, Samir had the greatest back the world had ever seen. Remember, this was before Haney and Dorian and Ronnie. Now, Arnold had built great upper back thickness, and Franco had those incredible bat wing lats, but not even the Governator could outdo Samir when it came to the lower back. Holy cow, man, that's gotta be the best Christmas tree of all time right there. I mean, you could paint that thing green, throw a yellow star up top, and slap it on a Hallmark card. When we get to the top 10 Christmas trees video, I'd be surprised if anybody manages to top this. And in the back double biceps, forget about it. I'd wager that this was even better than Lee Haney's when you factor in the balance through the lower body, especially with those calves. And that's just it. Samir wasn't missing a single body part. Like, seriously, I can't think of any area that could be labeled as a real weak point. Maybe the thighs could have used a little more size, certainly by modern standards. But for the early 80s, I don't think so, not really. Probably the only thing that kept him from winning multiple Olympia titles was the fact that he rarely came in at 100%. Even Sean Ray, who I had firmly among the top 10 most genetically gifted bodybuilders ever, said that Samir Bannu would have been his greatest threat if they'd competed together in the 212 division. Think about that for a second. Not Lee Priest, not Lee Labrada, not Rich Gaspari or any of these other legendary names. No, the Lion of Lebanon is who he feared most. Because Sean has a critical eye and recognizes that Bannu was complete. He was the total package and would therefore be dangerous no matter the pose. So that's what makes Samir Bannu worthy of discussion when we're talking about all-time great genetics. Okay, up next is the Black Prince, Robby Robinson. Probably not too many of you were expecting to hear his name, but then again, probably not too many of you are surprised now that you did hear it. At least I would hope not. After all, we're talking about quite possibly the greatest biceps of all time. I certainly think so. Those things were mountain peaks, man, and unlike, say, Arnold's biceps, for example, Robinson's were actually symmetrical. Okay, so the footage seen here is from a guest posing he did out in Austria back in 1981. And yes, I said guest posing, though you can still see some cuts through his midsection and thighs, which is commendable. I chose this clip because, despite not being in true contest shape, it was one of the closest examples I could find of him near his prime, which would have to be the late 70s, where he took runner-up to Frank Zane once and placed third in his weight class twice. At the end of the day, the reason I went with Robinson over similar options like Serge Nubret or Brian Buchanan is because I feel that Robby had better legs. He actually had some nice quad sweep. It might not look like it here, but go check him out in the 1987 Olympia, and you'll see the improvements he made in this area. But overall, I feel he looked better back here in 81. Now, to be honest, I would rate a guy like Nubret above Robinson if we're talking purely aesthetics. And I did so a couple years ago when I made that top 20 aesthetics vid. But when we go body part for body part, I think Robinson comes out on top. Aside from the biceps, he also had a killer V-taper with that cinched-in waist and flaring lats, and the vacuum he so often threw in only exaggerated the effect. His back development was also on point, so yeah, Robby Robinson, folks, definitely underrated when it comes to the genetics discussion. Well, he was underrated just in general, criminally so if you ask me, perhaps because footage of him in his prime years remains so rare. Anyway, well, let's move on to the last guy I want to mention today. And I saved one of the best for last, so let's go out with a bang here, because that's right, we're talking about the marvelous one, Melvin Anthony. To me, Melvin was basically the next best thing after Flex Wheeler and Dexter Jackson. He had the same ultra-round muscle bellies on a slim jointed frame, a great back, and amazing symmetry and proportions with that V-taper and tiny midsection. Anthony actually had one of, if not the, smallest waist measurements in history, at a purported 27 to 28 inches during his prime, a number I believe only the myth Sergio Oliva himself could rival. The reason Melvin's not in the same league as guys like Flex and Dexter, however, is because he was always a little too soft. He never quite dialed it in like they did, so he never had the same level of refinement on display and therefore didn't win any major shows, aside from the Night of Champions in '04. But in terms of genetic potential, you could see all the parts were there. In my opinion, the only muscle groups that were somewhat lacking at a structural level were his pecs and calves. But when he came in full, like what we see here at the '01 Ironman Pro, Even those areas look solid enough in most shots. As with the aforementioned Samir Bannu, Melvin was listed at 5'8", which isn't that tall, but it's tall enough to still be dangerous to most of the bigger guys. And I know people are going to be asking away in the comments, so I might as well just say it here. This is the main reason why other noteworthy names like Danny Padilla and Thierry Pastel remain absent. Both of them were only 5'2", so while they may have looked damn near perfect on their own, you simply cannot be considered at the top of the genetic pool when you're giving up so much size. Bodybuilding is a muscle mass contest after all. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you agree with these choices or if you think somebody else should have been included. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. But until next time, this has been the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.